Welcome to class, everyone. Today we discuss types of communication, still in line with our previous discussions on agricultural communication. We want to look at types of communication, and at the end of the class, you should be able to do the following. One, hold an in-depth discussion on interpersonal communication, and then be able to discuss the concept of mass communication in details. So in this session, we are going to look at the two major types of communication involving agricultural communication. So we're going to look at interpersonal communication, and then we're going to discuss mass communication. So let's look at interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication occurs when there is an interaction between one person and another. Thus, when an extension agent visits a farmer, he communicates interpersonally. Usually, the communication occurs in a face-to-face situation. However, there may be exceptions when a person writes a letter to another person or even calls another person on phone. So that is also interpersonal communication. But then, in the case of phone calls, it may not be face-to-face scenario, except when possibly you are doing a video call via WhatsApp, or you are holding a video conference, and then maybe participants are asked to switch on their videos. Then you can see yourselves face-to-face. But except in those cases, even with phone calls and other forms of calls, whether WhatsApp calls or national calls, there is that interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication that is going on. There are a whole lot of controversy surrounding interpersonal communication. Sometimes people ask on the issues of when does interpersonal communication become mass communication. For the purpose of this study, interpersonal communication is limited to an interaction between one person and about 20 persons. When the audience is so large, maybe beyond 20, then we're talking about group communication. I just hope that is very clear. We've been able to define interpersonal communication now. So let's look at the advantages of interpersonal communication. Some of the advantages of interpersonal communication will include: one, since it takes place usually in a face-to-face situation, it becomes more personal and involving. The transmission of message is also very fast. That is two. The third one is that it is a relatively inexpensive method of communicating. The channel hardly breaks down. Now, we're not saying the channel will never break down, but it's a bit more difficult for the channel to break down. Also, the fourth one is that feedback is immediate and guaranteed. Then, fifth one, it is easy to monitor and modify the message if it is not producing the desired effect. And then the sixth one is that it is more effective in mobilizing people for action. So these are the major advantages of interpersonal communication. Let's look at the difference between verbal and non-verbal codes. Verbal and non-verbal codes. Of course, they are also parts of the elements of communication that you will need to know. Now, while linguistic communication is restricted to the vocal channel in speech and to the visual channel in writing, linguistic communications limited to vocal channels for speech and then visual channels in writing. Non-verbal signs occurs in additional modalities. Example, a handshake may involve vision and pressure, as well as thermal dimension. You know that I see when someone will shake you and then a communication is sent forth. That's the way you shake somebody and then you know that this person is not bold, this person is timid, things of such nature. That's the way you shake somebody, this person is, a whole lot of feelings can come through handshakes. So while linguistic codes appear similar in complexity and evolution, as we move from language to language, non-verbal codes range from the very simple to the very complex. Okay, let's discuss accompaniments. The accompaniments in agriculture. The use of accompaniments in agriculture. Here, we just want to highlight three major important uses of accompaniments in agriculture. One, some utterances are meaningless or ambiguous unless the non-verbal accompaniments are taken into account. So what we're saying here is that the non-verbal accompaniments help to complement and elaborate on verbal utterances. A lecturer may point to a part of a diagram. If this part of the teaching is audio taped and then maybe possibly recorded for extension workers, like what we are doing now, if I prepare this for extension workers, it will not become as effective as it will be when we use accompaniments. Then another form of accompaniments in extension, another use of accompaniments in agricultural communication. Yeah, we'll be looking at managing synchronizing. When two or more people are talking, they have to take turns to speak. You know what it means to synchronize. So this is achieved mainly by non-verbal signals. During teaching sessions on the field, adults tend to ask questions very often. If the agent is making an important statement and a question which might make him lose trend of what he is saying is asked, the extension agent should simply stretch out his arm and spread his palm towards the person asking the question. That signifies that he should hold on and allow the lecture to continue until an appropriate interval. So you see the non-verbal now coming in, coming to assist in managing the synchronized communication. Then the third one is that non-verbal accompaniments will be used in sending feedback signals. When someone is speaking, he needs to know whether the listeners understand, believe, or disbelieve. The answers are obtained by careful study of the other's face and actions. For instance, if you look at somebody's face, you should be able to know if they are flowing, or not. When the negative reactions are shown, the extension agent or the agribusiness manager should know that nothing substantial will be achieved. So it's left for the extension agent or the agribusiness manager. You will now decide either to continue or to discontinue. But the best option is to discontinue the teaching if the people are bored, tired, or inattentive. I hope you paid keen attention to what we've discussed as you prepare yourselves as communicators on field. These details are necessary. Let us now discuss mass communication. Mass communication, because mass communication is also another aspect of agricultural communication, or better say, agri communication is part of mass communication. Let's define mass communication. Mass communication as institution and techniques by which specialized groups employ technological devices, including radio, social media, to disseminate symbolic content to large, heterogeneous, and widely dispersed audience. Of course, you know what we mean by a heterogeneous audience when they are not of same social variables like social status, social strata, and the rest other values that we look at when we look at the social system. Now, the mass media and mass communication are often used interchangeably in discussing communication. Mass communication comes with certain characteristics, and that will be the end part of our discussion as we look at the characteristics of mass communication. First of all, it requires complex formal organization for their operation. You look at the production of newspapers, televisions, some of our social media handlers. It's not something you do casually, especially if you want to do effective communication. So it calls for the deployment of highly skilled personnel and therefore occurs in a formal setting. This is what distinguishes it from informal, unstructured, and interpersonal communication. The mass media are directed towards a large audience. That's another important characteristics you need to know. The first one is that it requires complex formal organization for their operation. Then it's directed towards large audience. It's not something you do for one person, targeting one person. No, you target a larger audience for mass communication. Another characteristics is that mass communication is usually public. That is to say that the content is open to all. Distribution is relatively unstructured and informal. Then you also need to know that the mass media can establish a whole lot of contacts with large number of people within a very given short period of time. So these are the pattern characteristics of the mass communication that you need to know. One, for they are usually formal, requiring complex formal organizations. Two, they are directed towards large audience. And then three, they actually focus on majorly public. And then four, they can establish large contacts. Four, they can establish contact with large audience within a very short period of time. So that's the end of the session for this class. Thank you for your time.